Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody. It's Ken Calvert, and welcome to the Father Joe podcast. I'm your co-host, Mr. Ken Calvert, and he is the other side of this, the equation that we call the Father Joe podcast. Our star, Father Joe, just returning from vacation. You had a good time, yeah?
Very good, but I'm a little star, not a big star, but go ahead.
Together we're the start of a new constellation. How about that, okay?
Oh, I love that. I love
that. All right, so I was thinking about this morning when I thought about your return from Florida. If you haven't heard the previous podcast, I'm not sure we've mentioned this specifically, but you did say that you won't wear your collar on the plane because you don't want to attract people who want you to hear their confession. So you just took it nice and simple. Flights went well.
Everything went well. Of course, it's not as bad today because a lot of people are staying away from the hard liquor. But in the old days, the hard liquor was big on a plane, and of course, when they would fly, you say, "Oh my God, the plane is going down. Will it make it?" And so then they, Father, do you think you could hear my confession quickly before we land? And I says, if we land. I said, okay.
So this guy said, forget you.
That's right.
Where's the drink cart? Flight attendant, please.
Another scotch, yes.
So you're back and you're well rested, you're ready to go. But while you were there in Florida vacationing, did you say Mass?
I did.
Do you find a local church then, or do you let them know in advance that you're going to be down there and that you'll be
no.
willing to help out?
I just find whatever local church there is. You know what, I was thinking a lot about the number of people that go to Mass in Naples, Florida, and in Marco Island. It's amazing. When you go into those churches, they're packed, standing room only sometimes, particularly during this time of year. And also what happens is the big question, why can't we get that many people on a daily basis in Michigan? Well, here's why. I think I was giving it a lot of thought. They forget that we're all coming from different places, and they themselves were going to the Mass in Naples or Marco, or the Mass goers in whatever part of Michigan they come from. So you put all of those people together and you have a big crowd.
Sure.
So, but they're thinking, oh, this is a regular parish church, and so you have all these people going to daily Mass. Well, that's because they're all coming from different places, and they're the ones that go to daily Mass. The other thing, too, it has become a ritual, and a nice ritual, too. It's a nice way to start the day. Mm-hmm. They go to Mass, and then they meet for breakfast somewhere, and so it's a nice way to begin the day.
What about, did you celebrate Mass, I assume you did, on Laetare Sunday?
With
another priest.
Yeah, exactly.
But you wore your rose vestments.
No, I don't like wearing those.
Well, you didn't wear them.
I just wore the purple.
All right. So we found out in a past podcast that is an option of the priest. Okay.
Well, see, in the old days it was de rigueur, as they say. You really had to do it. But nowadays, people just put it aside, or sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, well, I found that a fascinating piece that we did, and I believe it's just one podcast ago that we were talking about the various colors within the Catholic Church and the chasubles and the vestments and all of that. With that said, you were in a warm climate, and unfortunately here it's still rather cold, but we did celebrate yesterday the first day of spring. And eventually things are going to turn, and it's going to become warm and sunny and happy, and the birds will be chirping, and the flowers will start to appear before us. Probably a good time for us to do a little spring cleaning of the soul, perhaps. Sort of straighten up our own home, don't you think?
Yeah, and of course that's what Lent is all about.
I waxed so poetic.
Cleaning up, if you want to make room for the Lord enter into our hearts. And as you say, the daffodils are trying to get through the snow right now, and they're doing okay, so we will see them in a while. But it is a time for spring cleaning. Actually, Old English, Lent comes from Old English, if I'm not mistaken. But Lent is a different form for lengthening. So as the days are lengthening, the word Lent is used to prepare for Easter. So the root of the word Lent, I don't think, is religious in any way. It's just the idea that it gives us time as the days get longer to prepare for the beautiful day of Easter.
It's not a derivative of the Latin
I think it's from
vocabulary.
From Old English.
I like to use the seasons to evaluate and sort of reestablish some new goals. So I think that going through Lent, going through that process, you're probably thinking about doing that. And with Easter coming, we can move forward with that process.
Exactly. I mean, we've been actually making a great examination of conscience, I call it.
Sure.
A big one. You know, very often when we go to confession, we make an examination of conscience, but, you know, it's just for the week or 2 days or whatever. But I think sometimes we carry heavy burdens with us, and it's a time to look at that and to see if we could get rid of those burdens, if you want, and open our hearts out completely to let the Lord in. And, of course, especially as we prepare ourselves for the high holy day of the Catholic Church, which is Easter.
Getting back to the spring and the spring cleaning of the soul, if you will, if you had a recommendation for people to, you know, as I said, at some point, you know, they always remind us when we change our clock. It's a very good time to replace the batteries in our smoke detectors and do various walk-arounds within the house to make sure that we're doing everything correctly. And what I was talking about at the beginning when I was talking about sort of doing a parallel to the church and to spring and to cleaning, it is a good time for us to sort of look inside and see what we can do and clean up and what's working just fine.
The way you have said it is, in my mind, perfect, okay? Mm-hmm. Because that's what an examination of conscience is all about. I think that Lent is like an elongated examination of conscience, rather than something we do in 2 seconds. But we try to find where our weak points are, where we need a little bit of work here, a little bit of work there. It's just like you said, spring cleaning. We've got to attack the attic here, or we've got to do the living room or the dining room, and whatever. We need some repairs. Well, we have internal repairs that we have to work on. And so I think that's what Lent is all about. It's working on those repairs spiritually as well as physically as we prepare to celebrate summer and all of these other good things.
I like to think of it this way, too. You know, there are times when you finally just say, no mas, you know, to the litter. And you say, that's it. I'm just going to turn my head. I have not touched that article right there for 6 months. I'm not using it. Why am I holding on to it? Get rid of it. Well, I think there are places within the human system, if you will, that you haven't relied on for a long time, that you're doing wrong or whatever it is. Get rid of it.
Exactly.
And so that's, you see, what I've done is I've tried to take what you've kind of taught me or refreshed me, if you will, and I try and put that into practice. Hasn't really been all that difficult for me to do because I've really made it a really simple thing to do, but I continue to try and do it. And that is, I've tried to notice more and more how I can be a little more patient, how I can possibly listen a little better, how I can try and be just, I like to think of myself as a nice person, but I'm trying to even be nicer. And it seems to be working out rather nicely for me. So
I certainly feel the same way because very often I can be very abrupt with people, and I try to remember that that's not the way to go.
Right.
And, you know, at least be more listening. Don't jump to conclusions. Wait for people to explain what they're trying to say before you interject. I think it's very often the problem with me anyway, that you try to answer a question before the question has been asked. And really, you should at least allow the question to be asked first, and then you can respond. But do it in a more diplomatic way, a much more understanding way. You know what? I have to tell myself, shut up, Grimaldi. Listen, will you?
That's a good point, because I was going to ask you, well, rather I was going to tell you that I think that most people just assume that priests don't have moods, don't have fits of anger, that don't, like any one of us standing in line saying, why in the heck isn't this line moving? Come on, people. Or, you know, I noticed at a car dealership the other day. I was tired of waiting around, and I noticed that I became rather abrupt, and it didn't serve me well at all. It probably cost me a little more time, because the person that I needed to help me decided he wasn't going to be so friendly and assist me in a really quick fashion.
Well, the other thing, too, is your blood pressure keeps going up.
It does,
so
and that's not good.
Before I go out on the road, because I know I'm very attuned, if you want, to getting road rage.
See, now that's interesting. Really, you really actually...
Oh, that's for sure.
Okay.
It is. So what I do before I leave...
Wow.
Before I leave the house...
Wow.
Grimaldi?
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
So here's the thing.
Yeah.
Brace yourself.
Brace yourself.
Try to do something different. Think of something else and just take it easy and just don't worry about what the other guy's doing, but calm down because the time is going to be just as long whether you react or not. Right. So I have to talk to myself, and I try to convince myself, and it works. Most of the time. Most of the time.
I agree. I think there is a time on occasion where you just have to do a good old blow and go.
Yes.
I've gotten in my car after having a little row with somebody at the radio level, and I come out shaking, and my pulse is just a pounding, and I get in the car and I just sort of go, you know what? That felt really, really good.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that puts a little pep in your step. But it's good to know that priests also have a very human side like the rest of us, and they have to indeed, on occasion, sort of do a little spring reflection and say to themselves, well, yes, even Father Grimaldi can do better.
Not only that, I think priests have an obligation.
Sure.
An obligation to do better.
Sure, well, because, you're telling us constantly.
Yeah, so we're kind of being scandalous by not doing what we're supposed to do.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because other people will take that as, oh, he doesn't really believe that, and so on. So we have to be very careful as to how we react to situations as priests, as anybody else. Priests have all, capital A, capital L, capital L, all of the human qualities that anybody else has.
Oh, thank you, because that helps.
If he doesn't, he's a robot.
Yeah. Well, and we don't want that. No, I mean, it's much easier to be able to share your difficulties, your problems, your, angst, if you will, with a priest who says, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and we have the same temptations.
And as soon as you say that, it's like going to a doctor's appointment. And the doctor saying, I know exactly what you're talking about. I feel the same way. So that's interesting. Somehow I wanted to go here for a second. I don't know why, because I think about all the things that are required of you as a priest, and we've been through that before. But we'll end with this today. Larry King once told me when I was doing an interview with him, I said, what is the secret to your success? How do you do what you do so very, very well? And he said to me, I listen to what the person is saying, and I guarantee you that I will find my next question within the body of what they just said, as opposed to having prepared questions. I thought that was really good. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the secret to your success, Ken Calvert?
Oh, my.
I think you have a wonderful way to pick up as soon as we leave off on one topic to really segue right into the other one so beautifully. And it's very clear to the people.
I'm going to thank you very much for that. You satisfied with how we're feeling here today?
Well, I certainly am, and I thank everybody for listening, and for you, Ken, because you really bring this together.
Well, thank you so much, Father Joe Grimaldi. I'm Ken Calvert, and we will see you next time. And don't forget, you can follow Father Joe at Father Joe Podcast if you're on Twitter, and I highly recommend that you get on Twitter. It's at Father Joe Podcast, and Father posts every single day. And, of course, don't forget we're on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn and iHeartRadio, all the various outlets that you need to get your regular dose. Subscribe, please, to the podcast. That way you will get an alert that a fresh one is coming your way. And finally, you can do it the old-fashioned way, which is www.thefatherjoepodcast.com. With that said, Father Joe, I'll see you next week on another edition.
And once again, I look forward to it, Ken. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.